we're all about helping our customers take a customer-centric approach to growth. And that requires having the right strategies, being able to leverage insights from data, because we believe very much that that needs to harness data, that you have to have really good processes in place. And then you have to, of course, have performance measurement and management. Those are the pillars of our company. And I agree with you that if you're customer-centric, all good things can happen, or you're about having rapid followers and fans and loyalty. So we can talk more about that. But love the opportunity to speak with you about a topic I'm really passionate about, and I'm excited for you about your new books. That's wonderful.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. So Laura, let's dive right in.
Sure.
And you know, and talk about this.
Okay.
So what future specifically are you solving for? And the reason why I ask this question is it's really open-ended, because everybody's solving for a different function. So this is about you, right? And your company. What are you solving, right?
Yes. So we've always been passionate about our customers' success, whatever that might mean for them. Because if you're going to be a customer-centric consulting firm, you ought to be at least concerned about what matters to your customers.
Yes.
And we believe that most of the people we have had the privilege of working with have told us that what they want is long-term sustainable growth and enduring business value. And we say, great, well, the best way to do that is to be customer-centric. So that's the future we help our customers solve for, is achieving that long-term sustainable growth and enduring business value. And if they have it, then we have it, right? And that's why I have the privilege of being here for 25 years. We've seen a lot of ups and downs in 25 years, as you can imagine.
Absolutely. So can you explain a little bit about, I believe I understand, but for the audience that I'm going to be addressing, could you explain a little bit more about what you mean by continuous interviewing process? Because I'm sure there's a lot more to it than what I think there is.
So you're referring to the idea that in order to continue to be sustainable, processes have to also be sustainable. That's right.
Yes.
And enable your organization to thrive, right? So having worked at Motorola for 14 years, the father of Six Sigma, as you can imagine, process is a part of my DNA. So along with a few other things, so including data. And therefore, we believe very strongly that in order to be successful, your processes have to enable you to achieve what it is you're trying to accomplish. So I wrote my fourth book. You mentioned you've been writing books. My fourth book, which is Fast Track Your Business, a customer-centric approach to accelerating market growth, has a framework in it, which is a process, right?
Right.
Has a framework in it called the Circle of Traction, which we have trademarked and been using for a very long time. Just an interesting story behind this particular framework. And you can read about it, and we have a little bit about it on our website at VisionEdgeMarketing.com. But really the idea is we want everyone, in whether you're B2B or B2C or large or small or whatever industry you're in, you exist to serve customers, right? That's the whole thing, right? The purpose of business is to create a customer. And therefore, we wanted this idea of how to grow, how to leverage the circle of attraction to be available to anyone. It's not a secret. So we published it, and hopefully people are finding it valuable.
Excellent. So how does this approach differ from traditional methods of how people are thinking about their go-to-market? Now, you get more involved with, I mean, maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when you are working with your clients, you're focused more on top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom funnel, the entire funnel.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's just so we can have clarity around how companies typically approach growth, right? So being an engineer, I'm sure you're very familiar with this first approach, the product-centric approach, which is, if we build it, they will come. And those companies, because they put a lot of money in their R&D, and they're always about wanting to be first to market, right? And so that's an approach to growth. and buy our stuff because our stuff is cool, right? That's sort of that mentality. And we can think of companies that are all about that. And then we have what you were kind of alluded to, the sales-centric approach to growth, which is all about you making a number. And the funnel is really how they live. They live by the funnel. And those companies because the sales organization pretty much runs the show. And all kinds of things are happening in the sales organization to tell you that they're running the show. They offer things the company doesn't even make yet or may never make. They offer pricing that was never agreed to. I mean, we write all these kinds of things that they offer delivery dates that are, not even part of the typical manufacturing process. So you can really kind of get a sense of that. The third way typically that companies are growing is market centric. There's a kind of classic cousin of the product centric world, still very data oriented and still have products, but they're really about drafting the wave, right? They're waiting to see a trend, and boy, are we watching that happen in the last few years. We saw it with cloud computing, right? We've seen it with cybersecurity, and now we're all watching it with AI, right? So you can see those companies coming. They're like mushrooms popping up, right? When the iron is hot, they strike. The last group is what we call the customer-centric organizations, and that's really about understanding who your customers are, where they are, and how to engage with them to build long-term relationships with them. And it's a very, so it doesn't mean that you're still not thinking about the funnel, but you're thinking about the entire life cycle of the customer. And so that's a little bit different than just thinking about the front of the funnel or the middle of the funnel or the end of the funnel, because we're really talking about the life cycle of the customer.
I'm glad you said that because I'm in the absolute agreement with everything you said, and I was hoping you were going to answer it that way, and you did not disappoint. That's awesome. Thank you so much. It's because this is exactly correct. The buyer has fundamentally changed in my experience. And can you talk to that? Do you agree that the buyer has changed, first of all?
I don't know if the buyer has changed, but the way they buy has significantly changed. So maybe that's the way to think more about it, is their behaviors. And when you're customer centric, you're thinking about the behaviors, right? You're behavior oriented. And so what used to happen, so like you, I've been an entrepreneur for a very long time. Like you, started very young, whether it was raking leaves or shoveling snow or selling chocolate as a young person. Okay, there you go, right? And then over time, going into various different, whether it's financial services or healthcare or manufacturing technology companies. And so people's behavior, how they buy, has changed. In the old days, when I sold office supplies, I either was knocking on the door of a business, talking to an office manager who made the decision, counting their pencils and pens and paper in their stash, wherever they kept their stash of stuff, and helping them place an order. It's not how things are done today. No one's walking into your office to help you buy office supplies. You're checking your own stuff, and when you feel the need or compelled to buy it, you go online or you initiate something with whether that's through an office supply company that you do business with regularly, or because it's convenient, you do drive down to the local office store, or you just place it online, right? So the behaviors have changed, and the days of knocking on doors and being an office supply salesperson is pretty much gone by the wayside. So does that kind of answer the question?
It absolutely does answer the question, Laura. I'm doing that. And in each part of those frameworks, I bring in customer psychology into the frameworks because of precisely of what you're saying. Because if you're not factoring in the customer psychology, how do you understand your customer? How do you know your customer? How do you know when you know them better than themselves? And that's not about spying. That's not about data. That is about real psychographics. That's what real firmographics on the companies if you're B2B. So I totally concur with that. But digging into that a little bit, how do you see your clients, your customers that you work with, managing that, integrating customer psychology into all of their go-to-market processes? How do you see that?
Okay, that's a really thoughtful question. So let's back up for a moment, because this is a really important set of distinctions that I think a lot of people struggle with. And we hear the word personas a lot. So I want to unwind that for a second. People often mix those up with the idea of a role or a profile and then a persona. So people are in roles. That role might be that office manager I was mentioning, or it could be the role of the CEO, or it could be the role of the CFO or the digital, marketing manager. These are roles, right? You apply for a job, they're a role. A profile are some of the characteristics of people who are typically in that role. It might be something to do with their education, the kind of schooling they went, the kind of experience they may have had to climb the career ladder as they made their way up in the ranks. It might include income information, right? And I would put that in more typical, what I would call the demographics or firmographics, the kind of companies they've worked for, uh, the revenue of those companies, those kinds of things. Maybe even the track they have in terms of the stints they've held, in terms of, like, for example, making your way up in the manufacturing ranks. You might have worked in a factory overseas before taking a role
Mm-hmm.
as a general manager, for example, right? Personas actually integrate what you're talking about, the psychology, right? What do we know about this person's thinking? What are their preferences, their values, their beliefs, their attitudes? Those kinds of things get woven into personas, so we can really begin to understand the messages that are going to resonate with them.
Right.
There used to, when I did work in the financial services industry, a lot of work I did was around the notion of personas, particularly known as clusters in the financial
Mm-hmm.
services industry. And a company that I used to really value how they organize that thinking. And I don't know what they're called today, because I don't work as much in the B2C world as we do B2B, but it was Claritas. And they were one of
Mm-hmm.
the early companies doing a tremendous amount of work around what I would call the psychographics. And so they would have the home and hearth group of psychographics, and the town and country, and the leisure and travel group, for example, so that you would know how to appeal to them in terms of whether it was a loan offer or an account offer or other type of financial service offer.
Right. That makes total sense, Laura.
So
Thank you. When you're getting into this, there's a lot of talk in the industry about hyper personalization. I've got my own opinion on this, and that's based on some fact, but I'd like to understand your perspective on hyper personalization.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out my perspective too, because it seems like I go back and forth on the fence, and we're certainly able to gather a tremendous amount of data these days. And at what point does it go beyond being personal to something that appears gets uncomfortable, right? If you get too personal too quickly, that can also be unsettling
Mm-hmm.
to customers. And we can know a lot more. In fact, I think I just heard, was it Google that just had settled, or was a lawsuit about some data they have to return or do something with because they collected it illegally or without permission? And I think that personalization is a result of a relationship, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
think about the relationships we create with the people we get to know. And when we first meet them, right? Think about this for just a moment, Philip. This whole notion of TMI, too much information, you don't want to share too much too soon, right? And it can be awkward when someone shares too much too soon, or you ask for too much too soon, right? So I think that we have to manage personalization based on where we are in the relationship. And that is, I think, goes back to understanding the customer journey, the touch points, the experience they're trying to have with you. And then as you get to know them, I'm really fortunate. I have people that I have been in relationships with now for over 20 years. Some of the people that I did business with have become more than just people I've done business with. My emails to them are obviously very different than someone I just meet, right? So I think that's where we want to be thinking about is, where are we in the development of this relationship that allows us to have the kind of appropriate level of communication with each other?
That is an incredibly insightful expression I have, and it puts the right color. And I'm going to quote you in this on the book because it's absolutely personalization is a result of where you are in the relationship. I totally subscribe to what you said. I've never described it that way, but that is absolutely wonderful. You can share about how you've been successful in really building this customer centricity with your clients.
Way back when, we don't do as much of this today because we are very focused more on strategy. But early on, we spent a lot of time talking about marketing and sales alignment. And I'm sure people are still talking about marketing and sales alignment.
They are.
And our whole philosophy was, it's not marketing and sales alignment. It's the company's alignment to the customer buying journey. Okay? So once you understand what the customer's buying journey is and the touch points and channels that are relevant to them as they make their way, you should align your marketing and sales and the rest of your processes accordingly. Okay, does that make sense?
Makes total sense.
All
And
right.
it's right about this precisely. Yep.
All right. And so when we work with our customers and do case study work and they want to talk about that, the first question we ask is, what do you know about how your customers, whether individually or as a group or as individual buyers or as a buying group, how do they move? What does that path look like? What are the things they need along the way to help them move to the next step? And in what channel do they want that? If you understand that, you can do all the things that we're talking about here, which was to your question. And that's really how we approach, and that's what some of our case studies, especially the ones that are around alignment, talk a great deal about.
Oh boy, you're preaching to the choir here. So this is absolutely spot on. So when you're leading into our question I wanted to ask you, which is specifically about the customer journey and customer journey mapping. What are some of your best practices that you can share about defining, about really not defining, but understanding the customer journey, and some of the tools that you recommend to people to use to do that?
I'm going to stay away from tools a little bit, Philip, because the number of tools continue to explode, and whatever I say today will be outdated tomorrow. But what I do want to talk about is how we frame things, and we call them the 6 C's. And we have them in the book, and I wanted to share them with you and tell people where they can find them in the book very easily, because these are really important in order to move your customer forward. So we talk about contact, connection, conversation, consideration, consumption, community. 6 C's, okay? Everybody in your world will move through that. Whether you're dating or you're making a new friend or you're building a business, those are the 6 C's. And when people understand that those are the basic phases, move away from funnel and pipeline and all that. Just understand where they are in the relationship they're having with you. But my point being, you go to these trade shows and someone will give you a business card. Today you swipe something or it's all electronic, and you would make an exchange. And people would come home from these trade shows and say they had a lead. They don't have a lead. They have a name with some contact information. They have made contact. They haven't necessarily had a connection. They haven't really even had a conversation. They just made contact with one another. And I think that a lot of companies think they're much further along in the relationship than the customer actually thinks they are in the relationship.
Right.
And if you think about it in those 6 stages, that will help, I think. And that's one of our best practices. And what data do you need in each one of those? And what are the behavior signals that tell you that they are moving, that they are ready to move to that next C? We have a organic growth readiness assessment for people who buy the book, and that is a really valuable thing to begin to use. But the whole point I'm trying to make here is whether you use ours or whether they use yours or whatever, find a framework that works for you and your organization. Learn how to leverage it well and implement it and take advantage of being successful with it. I think that's the message.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And again, I practice that very similarly to what you're suggesting. And the way I frame it with people is that the customer has to give you permission, right? Nobody wants to be sold to, right? So what you're addressing is that permission, that implicit permission, because they're ready in some ways. Or do you disagree?
Well, I don't disagree, but I would like to add an and to it. It's a courtship. Would we agree it's a courtship?
Yes.
Okay. And if it's a courtship, in today's world, the buyer is in the lead. Okay. It is a buyer's world today. And I'm old fashioned. I've been around a long time. So I'll just use a traditional courtship as a metaphor for this, right? And the girl and the guy. I know that there are various derivatives to this relation this today, but I'm just going to be simplistic, okay? The girl and the guy. Now, the girl is the buyer and the guy is the seller in the old days.
That's
Okay?
right.
Okay. So we're just going to, call me old fashioned. I can live with that. The guy's going to do things along the way to sell. And the woman isn't necessarily, right? The woman isn't necessarily saying, oh, I have to give you permission to give me those flowers. Oh, I have to give you permission to give
That's
me
right.
those chocolates. Oh, I have to give you permission. It doesn't really kind of work like that in the courtship. It's about building the relationship. So when you show up and you bring the flowers and she accepts the flowers, you're moving forward in the relationship. And it didn't ask her permission in order to bring the flowers. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So,
That's exactly right.
so my point is permission-based marketing opt-in is all good. The moment she said, yes, I'd like to have a date with you, she has essentially given permission. You can know when a relationship is moving, right? There are obvious signals in a dating courtship that the relationship is moving. And there are obvious signals in a business relationship too, if you're willing to pay attention, that the relationship is or is not moving, right?
That's
And
exactly right.
I think that we just need to remember that in the end, it's human beings doing things with human beings.
Absolutely. And it's that relatability, is that which forms trust. It's that relatability that forms the relationship. And relationships, I call me old fashioned too, as well. Like I grew up in an age where, the guy was courting, I courted my wife. I could, it was that whole process. And and I look at our younger generation. We've got two sons, who are in their late 20s, and there are and I see the differences in the behavior, and it's really been awakening to me over the last 10 years about. And I want to be sensitive to time here. Is there any other advice that you would give companies with what you're suggesting here?
Well, one of the questions that you asked, and I want to be sure that we touch on a couple of them, and one of them was about culture. And I don't want
Yes.
us to leave this conversation without at least touching on culture. We all know Peter Drucker's, quote of culture eats strategy for breakfast. what he was talking about was the human factor, right? And that's what we're
Right.
talking about here. And I do think it is important that a company recognize where they are in their culture. It's helpful if they have a board or an advisory board or a board of directors that has a customer-centric expert or expertise on their board. I think the leadership team needs to model the way of what it means to be customer-centric. I think it's important that processes are in place to support the culture in order to enable it to deliver on the promises to customers and to deliver the experience that customers have come to expect. And that takes me to one of your other questions, which we wrote a post on, and I kind of smiled when I read your question. It was on pitfalls and what to do. And so we wrote a post on the 4 most common mistakes companies make when it comes to customer centricity. And I didn't know if you had read that and that's what prompted your question, but I did want to mention them because I do think they're important for companies to realize that these things matter, right? And that is, you've got to have processes, and you should focus on those processes that are customer-centric first. Second, I think a lot of people get very myopic about revenue and making a number. They forget about thinking about customers are what count, right? And being clear about that. So having a customer-centric strategy, thinking in terms of customers, which customers, how many, what markets, those what are their preferences, their needs, their aspirations, really having a clarity around customer centricity, effectively using data. We are overwhelmed with data today. There's no doubt about it. So it's really not about having data. It's about being able to actually use that data and to turn that data into powerful insights that then translate into action. So those were some of the things that I thought were I wanted to mention. And then not having, another mistake is not having customer-centric measures, and it's very important to have those. And the ultimate key performance indicator that so many other customer-centric measures affect is, of course, customer lifetime value. So I always tell companies, find a customer-centric measure that you will live with and that you will measure on a regular basis as an indicator of whether or not you're moving the needle.
Where do you see companies struggling? Which groups and organizations are you seeing resisting customer centricity the most?
The challenge is, for most companies, is when there are times of stress, and stress can be challenges to getting capital, challenges to getting people, challenges in your supply chain. These are challenges that companies are facing all the time. Logistics challenges, people challenges of not having enough talent. When companies are in signs of stress, they tend to get very tactically oriented, right, for lack of a better word, and they move into random acts, right? And so when I'm thinking about strategy, it reminds me of one of my long-term mentors that I had when I worked at Motorola. I was there 14 years. I had a mentor that for 11 of those years, and he was a true believer in understanding when you set a course and you really believe in that course is the right course of action, you need to carry it out, execute that course of action, anticipate problems, do your scenario analysis work. What could be the things that could go wrong? That whole Boy Scout thing, be prepared, try to anticipate what will go wrong, have your contingency plans, but move according to the course of action, knowing that there may be casualties or things that will not go right, as opposed to random acts of trying to move forward. So I think that would be one of the most important lessons I learned in my early career. And there's something to be said for stay the course. And I think that's a message.
Thank you so much. And just to finally wrap up, last thing is, would you like to review or receive copies of the books when I'm done?
Of course, I would love to do that. And yes, I would love to see it. And I hope that your readers will greatly benefit. I mean, Fast Track was a bestseller, and we got a lot of really positive feedback, and I hope you receive
Awesome.
the same for yours.
Thank you so much, Laura. All the best to you and your business.
Please keep me posted on how you're doing, and
I will.
thank you very much.
Thank
Stay
you so
well,
much.
and
Take
good
care.
luck.